You're listening to the ADHD Support Talk Radio podcast. ADHD Support Talk is sponsored by ADDclasses.com. Visit www.addclasses.com to sign up for free webinars today. Hello and welcome back to ADHD Support Talk Radio. I'm your co-host, Lynne Edris, and as a productivity coach for more than 12 years, I've helped thousands of overwhelmed professionals reduce procrastination, improve time management, and get more done with less effort so that they have more time, more energy, and even more money for what they love most. And I know you can share the same success. You can learn more about me and what I do and the programs and services I offer at www.coachingadvantages.com. And I'm excited to share that my new and improved Push Past Procrastination program is ready for you. Visit pushpastprocrastination.com to learn about this 6-week group program and how you can overcome your struggle with follow-through and reclaim your time, reclaim your energy, and reclaim your life. And if you use promo code ADHD Support Talk, all one word, you'll get 10% off the program price just for being a listener to our podcast. So today I want to talk about what you need to know about your ADHD brain. At the time I'm recording this, I'm preparing to present a webinar at addclasses.com about harnessing your strengths to manage your ADHD challenges. In the webinar, I'm talking about 5 keys to harnessing your strengths. And I've talked in other episodes here about the importance of knowing your strengths and using them to manage your challenges using what I call your unique operating system, or your UOS. Your UOS comprises your unique talents, your strengths, your tendencies, and even your quirks, like your processing and your learning styles, your personal organizational styles, how your energy sort of ebbs and flows, your beliefs, and more. And your UOS is the most important fundamental key to your success, and it's already inside you. So when you're not working with your UOS, you're trying to plug yourself into someone else's way of doing things. And well, we all know how well that works, right? It's like trying to run Windows software on a Mac. My job is to help my clients uncover their UOS and develop systems and tools and ways of doing things that work with their natural strengths and tendencies, with their UOS, rather than fighting against it. And I've gone into great detail in this. There was a podcast episode I did in July of 2018 that I called Using Strengths to Manage ADHD. So you can learn more about it there. You can catch the webinar live or on the replay, the audio library at addclasses.com. So understanding and working with your UOS, I think, is the most important key to managing your ADHD, but it isn't the one I start to tackle first with my clients. Before you can excavate your UOS and use it to your advantage, some education is essential. It's impossible to manage your ADHD challenges and start to perform at the level of your abilities until you understand your brain, your ADHD, ADD brain, and why you struggle where you do. So we know that differences in structure, functionality, and neurochemicals all come into play, right? You don't need to be a doctor or a scientist to understand ADHD and the ADHD brain. But the first fundamental key to overcoming your challenges is understanding your unique brain. When you don't understand your brain and the root of your challenges, you can't advocate for yourself effectively. You misunderstand yourself, and you can't help others who misunderstand you to understand you better, right? You can't help others understand what you need so they can give it to you. If you don't understand why you struggle where you struggle, and you blame your challenges on things like laziness, weaknesses, lack of willpower, poor work ethic, and other moral judgments, your self-esteem's going to struggle. And you live reactively instead of proactively, putting out fires, dealing with crisis after crisis, and trying to do damage control all the time. So this is so important. As long as you are stuck feeling shame and feeling blame, you're blaming your challenges on some sort of moral weakness or failing, you will be 180 degrees from where you need to be to get a handle on your problems, to be in problem-solving mode. When you get yourself, when you really understand yourself, you can stop the blame and shame. You can be proactive in problem solving, you can repair your self-esteem, and you can reach your potential. You need to understand ADHD in general and how it's showing up in you as an individual. I always say that your ADHD is as unique as your thumbprint. So here are the 3 fundamental things you need to understand about your ADHD brain. I'm going to go through them superficially because the focus of this podcast is obviously not the same depth as the webinar, right? So You can check out articles on my website if you want more information about these things, these cornerstones of ADHD. Check out podcasts here on ADHD Support Talk, and check out the ADDclasses.com audio library if you can't join the live webinar, if you're listening to this too late. First, you need to understand attention in ADHD. Next, you need to understand the dopamine connection in individuals with ADHD. And then you need to understand the role of stimulation in ADHD. So understanding attention and ADHD is first. ADHD isn't really a deficit in attention. It's a difficulty in our ability to regulate our attention. So the deficit isn't really in our attention. It's in our ability to regulate that attention. It's trouble with filtering out what we don't want or what we don't need to pay attention to at any given moment. Trouble resisting distractions. Trouble maintaining focus where we want it. So we can have a lack of attention in certain situations and a surplus in others. So it's all about a trouble with regulation. And this struggle to regulate our attention and our focus also plays a part in our memory, especially our working memory. Pretty typical stuff for those of us with ADHD to struggle with memory. And I've done several podcast episodes here on memory and ADHD that are worth a listen if you don't have a good understanding of this piece. But it's all tied to our difficulty with regulating our attention. Not a so-called deficit in our attention, right? That's so important to understand and to help other people understand. Next, you need to understand the dopamine connection in individuals with ADHD. Scientists have found that dopamine is in short supply for those of us with ADHD. So in brain scans, scientists have shown that we don't process dopamine in the same way that other individuals do. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's responsible for feelings of motivation and feelings of reward. So studies have shown that the human brain needs dopamine to create motivation, and by definition, really, motivation is the force that directs behavior. So without internal motivation, it's very, very difficult to take action. It can feel very difficult to take action. So research has also shown that because the ADHD brain is dopamine deficient, it's much harder for an individual with ADHD to create their own motivation to do something if something's not inherently interesting to us, right? It's not a choice. It's not a manipulation. It's a dopamine thing. But that doesn't mean we are forever doomed to be at the mercy of our brain chemistry, or that our lack of motivation should let us off the hook from performing at the level of our abilities, right? So there are plenty of things we can do to increase dopamine production and work around our motivation struggles. I often say motivation is one of the big lies we tell ourselves, right? We don't actually need motivation to do stuff. We don't actually need motivation to take action. But that's a hard thing to do when you don't really understand what's going on with your brain. It's something I work on with my clients every single day. And I've done podcast episodes on motivation and dopamine here as well. So search the ADHD Support Talk website and you can learn more, absolutely, by me and by other guests and experts who have been here. Next, you need to really understand the role of stimulation in ADHD. And this is so important. One of the comments I hear most often about those of us with ADHD is, how can he or she have an attention deficit when they can focus just fine on things they like? I've heard variations of this complaint from frustrated teachers, parents, and partners of individuals with ADHD, and it usually centers around the contrast between the individual's struggle to focus on things they don't like or don't find inherently interesting, like homework, paperwork, chores, and so on, and their ability to focus intensely on things they do like and things they do find interesting, like Legos for kids, video games, surfing the web, golf, reading. It totally depends on the person. So it's no wonder that people get confused when an individual with a so-called attention deficit can focus like there's nothing else in the world when they're doing something that they enjoy, but can't seem to manage to focus enough to do other things. And I can understand the confusion and the frustration because of what it looks like and because of, I think, the misnomer of what the condition's called, right? But what I think it really boils down to is a lack of understanding the basic tenet of ADHD as it relates to stimulation. So to sum it all up, ADHD is all about stimulation and interest. But stimulation and interest are individual, situational, and relative, and they have a limited shelf life. And I'll tell you more about what I mean as I go. Of course, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist or neurologist, but here's how I explain it in simple layman's terms. ADHD is a condition caused by understimulated areas of the brain. So specifically, individuals with ADHD have insufficient neurotransmitter activity, particularly dopamine, but they've shown in brain scans that certain areas of the brain in individuals with ADHD actually less active electrically. They actually process less glucose, in layman's terms. So in the parts of the brain that are responsible for regulating things like interest and attention, among other functions, those areas of the brain in people with ADHD can be underactive. So these underactive areas can be fired up, so to speak, with increased dopamine activity and all by the things that are stimulating to that individual. Things like medication, things like exercise, and other external stimulants, including things they find very interesting or exciting. And stimulation isn't always positive, right? Things like deadlines, things like emergencies, things like crises, things like, impending negative consequences can be stimulating as well and help us sort of fire up those underactive parts of our brain. So when an individual is interested or stimulated by something, whether that's something positive or something negative, that underactive part of the ADHD brain starts working more effectively. I always say it sort of fires it up. So for the purposes of ADHD, interest and stimulation are sort of interchangeable. So it's important to keep in mind that what's interesting or stimulating to one person is going to be very individual to that person. So what's interesting or stimulating to you is very unique to you. That's why, I always say your ADHD is as unique as your thumbprint. My ADD brain could never get fired up by my son's shoot 'em up video games, just like his ADD brain could never get fired up by writing one of my ADD blogs or a podcast or something like that, right? And this is where the link between interest and stimulation and motivation comes into play. Again, individuals with ADHD are deficient in the neurochemical dopamine, the motivation brain chemical. So motivation can be a struggle for us. And to make the issue even more confusing and frustrating until you really understand it, interest can also be relative or situational. So what's stimulating or dopamine producing in any given moment also depends to a great degree on what else is going on in and around us. So the research paper or tax return that's not inherently stimulating, is and can be extremely difficult for them to take action on until that level of interest increasing dopamine is infected by something else, like a looming deadline or being faced with another task that's even less motivating or less interesting. Let's see if I can explain that. So here's the one example I always use. Cleaning, especially dusting, is way down there on the interest scale for me, right? Way down there on a level of stimulation for me. But if I'm faced with taxes, if I'm faced with filing, dusting suddenly becomes significantly more interesting, more stimulating to me by comparison. Compared to taxes, compared to filing, dusting is more stimulating. It's more interesting. So I always joke around with my family, and my family knows that if I'm walking around the house with a duster in the middle of the workday, or if I'm running around the house cleaning baseboards with a Mr. Clean magic eraser when, it's definitely not in the plan, they need to send me back to my office because I'm obviously avoiding something, right? There's a good chance that there's some paperwork waiting for me or some taxes or a project that I need to be working on that I'm struggling with. So compared to paperwork, compared to filing, compared to taxes, dusting becomes relatively stimulating and interesting for me. And of course, there are plenty of things you can do to address these challenges once you understand them. And that's what we do as ADHD coaches, right? All day long, every day. These are behaviors you can learn, things you can change. These are not moral failings or character flaws, right? And here's what I mean. Until you really understand your ADHD brain and yourself, your own ADHD, you're going to struggle with blame and shame and unmet potential because you're moralizing your challenges, so to speak. Rather than looking at them as problems with solutions, you're looking at them as character flaws. You're looking at them as moral failings. Most of my clients come to me with their self-esteem in the dumper, basically, and so focused on what they perceive as their character flaws that they can't begin to give themselves credit for what they accomplished. Seriously. I work with people from all different backgrounds, and I see this in some incredibly accomplished professionals, like doctors and lawyers and engineers and corporate executives and on and on and on. And after years and years of struggling with these ADD challenges and not really understanding why, it really takes a toll on how they feel about themselves. Living with ADHD myself for so many years before I really understood it in adulthood, I know that feeling, and I really understand how it happens. After all, like when you know what you need to do, and you even know to some extent how you're supposed to be doing it, but you still don't follow through consistently, most of us draw the conclusion that there must be something wrong with our moral character or our work ethic or something like that. It must be a character flaw, right? Well, wrong. Now that you know a little bit more about what you need to know about your ADHD brain, you know differently. And I want you to start thinking about your challenges in that respect from this, what you need to know about your ADHD brain perspective. So I hope you found something helpful in this episode, and I hope you'll join us in the ADHD Support Talk Facebook group. If you have comments, questions, or want to know more about this topic, feel free to share or reach out to me there in the Facebook group. Or, of course, you can always contact me through my website. And if your struggle with follow-through is holding you back from reaching your potential, please check out my Push Past Procrastination program at www.pushpastprocrastination.com. Imagine your life when procrastination isn't a challenge. It's really possible. So join us today and use that promo code ADHD Support Talk to get your 10% discount off the registration price. As always, I appreciate your attention. Thanks for listening to ADHD Support Talk, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Thanks.